Good evening, gentlemen. Uh, hope for some of you it is the third semester and others it is the first semester. Enjoying your work and more so with the activities related to mobility planning and management. Yep, the labs and the courses and all of that. I hope and believe, I would like to believe that things are moving in a interesting and a rapid way. All right. Uh, Today, probably for the past 1 week, uh, you probably have seen us less frequently than otherwise we would meet you. And I'm sure you must have guessed that there's something happening, and that something is what we call it as a leaders program in urban transport. We have about 30 senior uh, urban professionals in the field of transport from different cities, I think 24 cities. Yeah, they are here. We're actually having a workshop. It's a capacity building program, and as part of this, we also have, and fortunate to have, senior professionals from the field supporting this activity, which CEPT has been undertaking for the past 6-7 years. Yeah, this is the sixth program that we are doing as part of this leaders program. Nitika is coordinating that program. And what we thought is that while we are here, take the opportunity of two very senior and accomplished professionals with us, formerly from the World Bank. One is Mr. Sam Zimmerman, and we met him almost like when we had just then started talking about BRT in Ahmedabad. Okay, 2006-7, son. Yep, and he has worked in the field. You know, he's almost like 50 years, several dimensions. People call him Bus Sam, and but then his range of activities are enormous. Yeah, when he speaks, people realize where they are, how things are, what mistake they're making. Okay, it's difficult to sometimes stop him, if that's okay for me to say. Yep, I think that's one very senior professional, a good friend of ours. He has supported all the activities of Center of Excellence here. We requested him to speak on what is generally called as an alternative analysis. Making choices is what is a critical task in planning, and that is the aspect which he will talk about. Yep. We also have with us another good friend of ours from the World Bank. कोई दादा दादी है इधर? Can someone go there and okay, थोड़ा दम का क्या है ना? Yep. All right. We have Dr. Ajay here. Is a transport economist. Yep. Worked for a very, very long time with the bank. Has been instrumental in initiating urban transport projects in several cities, and his, among other things, important contribution is towards urban transport institutions development. Yeah, AMTA, what we talk about, he was instrumental in establishing in one of the cities, and I'm sure that you will get to know more about how these institutions work in different parts of the world, and some things which he himself has been able to drive through. I think some of those things we'll get to hear from them. Therefore, there are two talks today. One is on alternative analysis, and second one is on urban transport institutions, their role and functions and all of that. I take this opportunity to welcome both of them to this forum and invite Sam to take charge and deliver his talk. Sir, please.
Find it. See, Well, first, let me thank Professor Swamy. It's always a pleasure for me to come to a beautiful place like Ahmedabad, and maybe the most beautiful place within that larger beautiful place, and to be associated with what I tell everybody who asks, the best architecture, planning, design program in India. So thank you for letting me take some of your time. Let me apologize to the professor and for Dr. Kumar for going over my allotted time, as I often do. So I'll apologize early on. Can everybody hear me? I like to move around. Anyway, take a look at this. Read it very quickly.
And we welcome going that extra mile.
We have a lot of time tonight, so if we go over, that's all right also. Anyway, read this thing through. The newspaper article from a newspaper in Jakarta. And while you read it, let me ask those of you here that have made a major purchase in the last year. Anybody here bought a bicycle in the last year? Motorcycle. I was hoping for a bicycle, not a motorcycle. Car? Shoes? Sneakers? Okay. All right. I forgot how young you were. But anyway, when I asked this question, the reason I'm asking the question is for you, I'm going to assume that you're planners, and that when your mother asks what you're doing, I'm studying planning, even if you're an architect. Okay. Anyway, think about the process you went through to make that purchase. Think about the process. Did you make the determination if you bought a pair of shoes, whether or not a pair of Ferragamo loafers, $450 imported from Italy, whether it was feasible, or did you shop? What am I going to do with these shoes? Am I going to use them for running in the rain, fishing, bicycling? Then, okay, then I go to a shop, and I don't say, give me the most expensive thing you have. You say, well, I need running shoes. What do you have? What are the options? Now, what does this thing say? A person who was a proponent, who stood to make big money, and I mean serious money, from building a monorail, and it would not pay for itself other than the fact that it would be subsidized in some way. And this person is reporting that I'm going to do a feasibility study of building a monorail to the airport. And that, of course, evokes an image of modernity, high-tech monorails, like at Disneyland, right? They're going to do a feasibility study, and they're already planning the bulldozers. The shovels are ready. Now, what does that tell you about this feasibility study? Anybody here want to take a guess? Absolutely. Asking the owner of a company that makes big money from monorails to do a feasibility study of building a monorail is like asking a fox to do a feasibility study of eating chicken. So the point is, when you're spending $1 billion, if you as students wouldn't dare do this for a pair of shoes, how much sense does it make to spend $1 billion with that level of thinking? And the answer is it makes no sense whatsoever. So therefore, we do something called alternatives analysis for major urban transport investments, irrespective of mode, irrespective of whether it's a flyover, which I see under construction, a metro under construction, BRTS, could be the major repair of an existing highway, extension of a metro. something called an alternatives analysis, and this defines what this kind of process and this kind of thinking is appropriate for. New bridges, new tunnels, new highways, extensions, light rail lines, metros, flyovers, etc. That's how we define a major investment. Now, in planning school, we learned that there are a lot of different factors impacting the decision of a plan, which is a statement of a way forward from where you are to where you want to go. What are the factors that affect decisions on those kind of big investments? Now, here's a quick list. First, the strategic vision, goals and objectives. Why are we buying new shoes? Why are we trying to improve travel to the airport? It's part of a bigger picture. It could be economic development, social development, environment. It could be related to access, providing accessibility to everybody to this destination. So that's kind of where we want to go. Very important for transport is travel demand. That's an essential part of any planning process. Not in the sense that whatever travel is going to be there unrestricted, we're going to provide huge highways or double-deck metros for, but an understanding of why people travel, where they travel, when, and the factors today and in the future which will influence that. Because in many ways, it's an imbalance between supply and demand that causes what we know as transportation problems. What's the network look like today? Even if we're building or contemplating a highway investment, a new flyover, doesn't it make sense to look at public transport in the same location? Sure it does. Because you can build highway investments that actually improve public transport by reserving space for the metro, light rail line, or BRTS. Same thing on the other side. You can't build a new metro system without providing ways for people to get to that metro. So metro planning revolves in part around what happens on the bus system, what happens on the bus system, of course, is related to the highway system, is related to sidewalks, pedestrian access. Land use patterns. Transport has sort of a two-way relationship to land use. I like to think of that. Sort of circular. On the one hand, there's a lot of land use in a city of 7 million people already. And a lot of that land use is unfortunately in places without very good transport access. People can't get to it and from it. So in one way, we want to serve land use as it is and as it will organically grow. But there's another perspective that we need to look at and understand when looking at major investments, and that is shaping land use. The odds are very high if we build a ring road that has unlimited access at many places, the land use, I'm not going to tell you which is good and which is bad, but the land use will look different if we build that instead of a BRTS system that has very good pedestrian access and associated with increases in floor area ratio, intensity. So we can both serve land use with transport and also force it or shape it in certain ways. So that's a factor we have to consider when we make our choice. Available rights of way. What we do in the center of Ahmedabad, the historic city, where we barely have enough right-of-way for sidewalks and walking and goods delivery, will be different than what we do in a newly urbanizing part of Ahmedabad in the direction of Gandhinagar. Cost, benefits, and impacts. Very important. Money matters. The smart cities are the ones that use available resources to make people's lives better. That's smart. It's not smart to use money that's in short supply for things that don't really, at the end of the day, improve people's lives. So costs matter. Benefits. every option that you need to look at is not going to give you the same benefits. It's not going to give you the same increases or improvements in safety, reductions in emissions, better access to health care, education, and jobs for newly emerging workforce, women, students, etc. And last, affordability. Very important factor. This may be the best, a monorail, a hyperloop. Everybody know what a hyperloop is? That's Elon Musk's thing that's going to go at the speed of sound between here and Las Vegas, I think. If you can't afford it, don't think about it. It could be the best thing in the world to do, but if I can't afford social housing, or I can't afford sanitation, or class sizes in our elementary schools go up to 65 because I'm building the Hyperloop, then affordability is not going to be there. So these are the combinations of factors. Now, is every option going to look the same in terms of this group of factors? Every option in a corridor, every option for the city of Ahmedabad as a whole region? The answer is no. There's an infinite variety of impacts as a combination of this and an infinite variety of alternatives. Now, strategic planning, at least my personal definition, and I think it comes close to what you've learned here, is not decision-making. Planning is not decision-making. Planning serves decision-making. You graduate, we would hope that one day you'll be a prime minister or a member of parliament. But until that point, if you're a planner, you're helping those ministers, those commissioners make decisions. When we talk about strategic, we talk about long-term. That's why that land use issue is so important. We're not talking about tomorrow. You don't invest $1 billion that's only going to be valuable for the next 2 weeks. You want to make changes over the long term. So long-term planning horizon, metropolitan scale. You can't do strategic planning for transport by looking at one little piece of Ahmedabad. You have to do it for the region as a whole. And of course, the output are strategic policies, things that you don't change every day. For an example, how is transport planned and managed in Ahmedabad? Institutional arrangements, which Dr. Kumar will speak of. You don't make a massive legal change in the institutional framework for transport without a lot of thinking. Major investments. Now notice that list, investment policy priorities, doesn't have the word projects in there. A strategic plan is not a list of projects that are stapled together. What do you want? What do you want? And the reason is, as we'll see in a second, is that the long-term horizon, the metropolitan scale, is really too broad to make a decision. And one of the things that CEPT has actually looked at, Professor Swamy and some students have done some research on, is the degree to which our forecasts of what new public transport investments in India, what the forecasts during planning were, and how they compared to what actually happened. Who can guess? Were the forecasts right on the nose? What do you think? Was the estimate of that ring road exactly made during planning, exactly what it cost for a metro? And why? Because we committed to doing something when we knew nothing. We hadn't done the engineering work. What about the benefits? And the benefits are always related to revenue. Usage. How many people are going to use the thing? The best party in the world with the best food and the best sweeteners, not food. The best party in the world won't be the best party in the world if nobody shows up, right? Well, the benefits of transport are related to people using it. How does the forecast and planning work out for most of the projects that we see around India? Big major investments. The answer is, even around the world, generally the costs are 2 to 3 times higher and the benefits 1/2 to 1/3. So the point is, if you make a very specific decision on mode, number 1, or alignment, number 2, mechanics, you're going to invariably, based in strategic planning, this this sort of ethereal, cloudy future forecast, you're probably going to be missing a lot. And the last point that mitigates towards doing further thinking on what the project would be for an investment is there's no silver bullet. Now, if I were speaking to you in 1900, and we wanted to approve public transportation, what were our options? In 1900, car? Did I hear car? For public transportation. A tram, electric tram on tracks, right? The first ones ran in trams, electric tram, in 1880. And if it was 1870, the option would be horse car. Right? And there weren't any other ones. Walking, riding a horse, and whatever else people rode, right? How about in 2017? Is there only one way to provide cost-effective, desirable public transport? Only one way? No. So there's no silver bullet, to use that expression. No single option that's going to be good for every possible situation. Okay, now rapid transit, let's define that, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Define that as a high-performance, high-quality, and high-capacity public transport mode. Majority of the service is on dedicated rights-of-way. That means not competing with God only knows what. It has stations, not bus stops. And typically bus stops, I don't want to say just an Amazon, but typically in most places, bus stops are a sign that says bus nailed to a tree. At the base of the tree, monsoon, with a mud puddle. We're not talking about something like that. Unique identity. You can tell where the thing goes by the branding, by the graphics. There are some of you here that know what I'm talking about, wayfinding. So, unique identity, permanent stations, dedicated right-of-way, high level of service, and it's a permanently integrated system. When you plan it, just as CEPT did for BRTS and the Metro folks did, you don't plan buses or vehicles separately from the stations. So otherwise, you'd have stations that the platform might be here, but the bus store over here, or vice versa. It's an integrated system. Now, what are the options for rapid transit? Remember, this isn't 1900. It's not 1870, and it sure as heck isn't when the first omnibuses were in Paris, 1760 or 1650. There's a debate on that. And they include BRTS, LRT, Metro, certainly monorail, and some other things as well. Now, we often hear in a place like India, huge country, huge cities, very dense, that we just don't have the capacity for bus systems. That forces us into expensive rail systems. And here are some real demands on busy metro systems and really busy BRTS. The busiest metro in Canada is 30,000 an hour. And if I'm not mistaken, that's roughly what the busiest metro line in Delhi runs, plus or minus that. The busiest one in the city that Dr. Kumar and I come from is about 13,000 an hour. But there are BRTS lines that have 43,000 people an hour using them. That's an hour, not a day. And that's on a two-track operation where there's passing. And on a single track, 20,000. So can we say that capacity means the decision has to go in a certain direction no matter what? No. No. What about other of those factors? We talked about costs. Let's take a look at capital cost and capacity. Again, capacity, there's a big gray area here. And capital costs, generally, the rubber tire-based systems are generally cheaper in most cases than a rail-based system. So we can't say that anything is dominant on a capital cost basis. This is recurring costs, operating and maintenance, the things that the city commissioners get nervous about because there may be subsidies involved. Again, at every level of demand, our rubber-tired, trained, if you will, modes for rapid transit going to be less expensive to operate? And how many of you think that bus systems are labor intensive, therefore they always cost more to operate than rail-based systems? Anybody? Well, they aren't always less costly or less labor intensive. You replace drivers with PhDs in electronics for fixing, although we're getting more of those PhDs in the bus side too. So that's the trade-off between direct operations and maintenance. So you're not in a slam dunk country here either. No slam dunk basketball. So in these major factors, cost, capacity, there's no silver bullet. So we need to dig down in the corridor or sub-area. What about passenger satisfaction? Are bus systems always less desirable than rail systems? Is BRTS second rate? Passengers will pass by BRTS, but always take a rail, even if they have a car or a choice. And the answer is no. People like quality. In the case of Mexico City, for an example, the fare on the metro is 2 pesos. BRTS is 6 pesos. So the average income of people using BRTS in Mexico City, which is about 1 million trips a day in a city of 26 million, is actually higher than it is on the metro. The metro is for the poor people. And why would that be? The metro has fewer seats, it's more crowded. In some cases, it's dangerous. The BRTS operates above ground. You get a little bit more room and higher overall quality. So the issue is quality, not what the wheels are made out of. This reflects some very intricate surveys that were done in LA, which nobody can accuse of being a special case of a great transit city, where people were asked to rate the available public transport modes in terms of something like 40 or 50 factors. I forget the exact number. Passenger comfort, convenience, reliability, smoothness, security. And you look at the aggregate scores that were given, and I'll give you the paper if you want to look at the details. This was local bus, regular bus like Ahmedabad Municipal Transit Corporation runs. Score there, 3.7. At the other end is a metro, and that was 4.18. Metro cost in the neighborhood of $400 million a mile. So $250 million a kilometer to build. And then you see here that BRTS, they have one line called the Orange Line, actually was rated as slightly better than 2 tram lines, 2 LRT lines. So even in terms of passenger acceptability, desirability, the willingness to use it in deference to driving in this very car-oriented city, even there's no silver bullet. So again, the factors suggest that you cannot make the assumption that one option is so good you do a feasibility study. So instead, you do an alternatives analysis. And remember, an alternatives analysis, which flows, as we'll see in a second, from strategic planning as part of that process, is not a feasibility study. And as we saw in Jakarta, the answer to almost every feasibility study, I've been doing this for 15 years, I've worked on a lot of them, watched a lot of them, is always yes. And my thought is, if it's always yes, skip the feasibility study and use the money to buy shovels. Right? It will happen faster that way. So it's not about the feasibility of a single alternative that somebody told you is the answer. Whether it was the mayor, or who knows who. It's not about that. It's not about what we often use at the World Bank, the rate of return. You often see the rate of return, it used to be for the World Bank, it had to be 12%, I think, right? And a lot of the projects came in at 12.01%. Not about that, because we know there's things besides economics, things that are not monetizable or even quantifiable that should affect the decision. And it's not about one alternative in which you ignore other alternatives. So one alternative could be terrific, but if that's the only thing you look at, you may be missing out on one that only costs half as much and that will allow you to build two instead of one. Two pairs of shoes instead of one. And last, feasibility studies rarely have a lot of public input to them. And my boss at the Federal Transit Administration about 30 years ago said, you engineers, we had a meeting of planners and engineers, don't understand because you don't like to talk to people. You only like to look at your shoes. But you're going to win or lose not on a technical basis. Your problems in implementing a project are not going to be caused by soil conditions, are not going to be caused by utilities, they're going to be caused by people. People that object to you, the fact that you never spoke to them. You're going to be implementing a new public transport system in one of the countries we work in, where there is informal public transport, but no formal bus system. So you're going to be putting, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of families out of business. You're going to be destroying their livelihoods, and you're not going to talk to them before you make a decision on what to do. So yet another difference between a typical feasibility study and an alternatives analysis. And I won't go ad infinitum on this, but this is essentially what a strategic urban transport planning process looks like. So this is part of it, but it follows a decision on places where you're going to be making a major investment. And generally what that investment might be. Highway improvement, highway plus rapid transit. And it provides the detail you need to reach closure. Another way to look at the same thing is here, you leave the typical comprehensive mobility planning process with a list of strategies, a list of potential investments, and then you enter alternatives analysis, which we in the World Bank call project identification, where instead of looking everywhere and looking at a million different options over 50 years, you focus in on a few options for the most pressing problem, corridor, or location. And you look at it in much more engineering detail. You actually do utility studies. You actually would talk to real estate professionals to learn about resettlement issues in the particular corridor. And once you make a decision on a project, once you've identified a specific project, then you go into the detail you need to develop a financial plan to see whether it's financially and economically feasible. So this is a slight twist on what you may have learned. What does the process look like? For planners in here, it should be a familiar one. You start with where you want to go. What's your vision for the region? And that pushes you into consideration of certain goals, objectives, and decision criteria. You use that sense of priorities in terms of sectors, land use, women empowerment, the empowerment of people with disabilities, to identify what's wrong with where you are, current problems, and what's going to happen if nothing changes. It's often called the do nothing, but it's never do nothing. So you evaluate the current situation in the corridor in question, in the context of the whole city, number one, but you also evaluate not only the current situation, but the null case. What happens if we don't really do much to alleviate the issues in the problem corridor? And then we evaluate alternatives, and we evaluate them not only in terms of congestion, which is important, but in transport in a sophisticated Indian city, there's a lot more additional issues that have to be addressed. Then we make a decision if it's a rapid transit project. This same approach applies for major highway capacity improvements, and then go on to detail it. And here are the guidelines. Let's talk about them one at a time. Very important. communications, and it's two-way. Listening to people, forgive me for talking too much, and also telling them what you've learned in your analyses. Listening and talking, both. Communications. It's not just meetings. Planners in the old days in the U.S., I remember I was working for the state of New York, the state DOT, and we were developing a plan for Rochester, New York. We put it together in the state capital, Albany, which is my beautiful home city. And the people that mattered, I was a student engineer, flew to Rochester, which is about 700 kilometers away, 600 kilometers away. And they had a meeting with the mayors and said, here's our plan for Rochester. And then they flew back to Albany. And that was communication. They had a meeting with political officials, never talked to the newspapers, never talked to anybody. And that was it. Not what it's about. Communications, transparency. And here's a rule of thumb for you transportation planners. Plan in a fishbowl. Plan in a fishbowl. The thing that makes planning effective is transparency, not hiding. Okay, so that's communications. Upfront goals and objectives, and the reason for this list is we in India, I'll include myself as an honorary Indian if it's okay. We in India tend to be obsessed with congestion. Right? Are we not? Right? That's the big problem. Now, if I were a working mother, I was working at home, and for some reason I wanted to get a job, and we only own one motorcycle, would congestion be the biggest issue, the most pressing thing for me? Wouldn't there be something else involved? Or I was an expectant mother, and I wanted to be able to go to see my doctor regularly, and I was too poor to even own a motorcycle. Wouldn't congestion be sort of irrelevant? Now, just a quick factoid for you. In most Indian cities, non-motorized transport plus public transport is the clear majority of all travel. Walking, biking, and public transport. In Ahmedabad, that's what percentage of the total trips?
54, 54.
Majority. Now, congestion does have an impact on things. On the one hand, if the congestion is high enough, at least you'll be able to cross the street without being killed, which is a problem here, in my opinion. On the other hand, congestion also impacts the effectiveness of mixed traffic public transport. But there's a lot of other goals and objectives we have, some of which deal with social development, some of which deal with the environment. And it's not only the global environment, the thing that Al Gore babbles about all the time. The number of people who are dying in Indian cities in excess of what would be if we cured the problem because of transportation-related emissions is huge. I would submit that in Delhi alone, it's probably in the tens of thousands a year, prematurely dying. And who is it that's prematurely dying? People my age. Maybe this is self-serving. So there's more than congestion. Another rule of thumb for these alternatives analyses is spend the time and the money to understand why the problem is there. And congestion doesn't occur by magic. There are reasons for it. Maybe related to the condition of the highway system, public transport system, maybe related to land use and transport combined. Professor Kumar and I work in Manila. This is from Manila. That's the end of an LRT station. It ordinarily would be a very, very, very busy place with people interchanging, three-wheelers and buses and taxis to the metro to go to distant locations. Not here. And the reason that the usage of that station is relatively low is you can't get to it. It's in a slum surrounding a market called Baclaran. So buses go an extra 4 or 5 kilometers where there's no capacity for them anyway. And this is where 2 metro stations come together. So if we didn't analyze the cause of congestion here, we wouldn't know that what we really need to do is extend that metro line. So understand the causes of problems. We know it's congested. We can open our eyes. They don't need to hire CEPT graduates to tell them that there's congestion in Ahmedabad or congestion in Bangalore. The graduates of CEPT, we hope, and I think they can, tell them why. And if you don't understand why, you can't get rid of it or solve the problem. Consider the right alternatives. If you're told by someone from an institution that has the word rail in the title or the word bus in the title, that the only alternative worth looking at is this, then by definition, you're in trouble. If people try to sell you something by telling you how bad everything else is, and by defining everything else in the worst possible terms, the only option to building a metro is more local buses and mixed traffic. Or the only alternative to BRTS, the only alternative to that local bus system is BRTS, I don't think so either. It may not even be worth doing BRTS in certain places. So consider the right alternatives. Don't set any of them up to fail. And also be multimodal. I personally believe in a city like Ahmedabad, there should not be construction of major highway investments. There should be construction of multimodal projects. You only get one shot at the apple, as we say in the States. So if you're going to be building a major highway, use the construction to improve public transport from the beginning. Most of the flyovers I've seen around the world hurt public transport because they take space away from the buses, which are stuck down below. So I'm not saying build the flyover with a BRTS in the middle. It could be with a metro. But it's tough to come back and add a metro line to an elevated highway if you don't think about it from the beginning. So make these alternatives multimodal, and from a public transport perspective, non-motorized transport, walking and biking are part of that investment strategy. They're not separate. Develop good support information. Be transparent, as I mentioned, and make sure the data isn't fooled around with. Everybody know what I mean by fooled around with? Lowballing costs and overestimating benefits to prove the point you want to prove. Okay. Very important, address risks. There is a worldwide phenomenon where major mega projects of all kinds have overestimated costs and underestimated costs and overestimated benefits. And someone in our group that we're working with in the Leaders Program we were talking about why a certain project somewhere cost so much more to build than they had estimated. And they said, oh, we didn't know there were utilities there. We had big utility problems. Of course, what are utilities? Sanitation, clean water, communications, electricity. You didn't know? Where are we? On Mars? What is it, 1750, where there's nothing under the street? You didn't know? Sure you knew. Rest to risk. And not to get into engineering detail really fast. Does everybody know what a contingency factor is in a cost estimate? You often see in a cost estimate a contingency factor that multiplies your estimate based on a percentage. Adds a percentage to it for unknowns and uncertainties. Now, if you're looking at a major highway project, including an overpass, or a metro project, especially underground, or a BRTS project in the middle of the street, and you're looking at it on the basis of very broad estimate made in strategic planning with no engineering, you should not be using a contingency factor of 15%. 100% is more likely for the parts that are risky, the parts that are uncertain. You may know the cost of buying a metro car with fair certainty, or the cost of buying a BRT vehicle. But once you get into hardcore construction in an urban environment, very uncertain. So that's what we mean by addressing risks. Don't always be overly optimistic. Put the facts on the table. Very important. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't fool around with the numbers. Now, as planners, designers, engineers working for someone else, we may be working for a consultant firm, and the president of our firm might have been told by the chief minister, if you ever want to work in this state again, you'll prove we need a... And that's a tough one. And I'm sure Professor Swamy is involved in speaking to you students about ethics, planning ethics, and how to solve that particular issue. But we shouldn't, with great joy, ask the following question. When the chief minister or the commissioner says, we want you to tell us how much 2 plus 2 is. And your answer shouldn't be, how much do you want it to be? Right? It was a lawyer joke that we tell in Washington. That when the lawyer is asked how much is 2 numbers added together, they'll always say, what do you think? How much do you want? That's not ethical. I don't know what the right answer is, but I know that that's not ethical. Forecasting cautions. Ridership forecasting is not rocket science. There are very logical steps that you go through. Number 1, to make the forecast, and number 2, to check and see if the results make any sense. So for an example, if you're in a city of 4 million people, and your consultants tell you that the best 20-kilometer metro line in that place is going to have 2.5 million daily riders and make a profit from the fare box sufficient to pay the whole thing, and Delhi has 1/4 that number, or Mumbai has 1/4 that number, and they're losing money big time, you know that something's not right. Not rocket science. The methodology that people use is tough, and CEPT has some of the best forecasting people in India. It's not the, I think the best, actually. Not some, the best. So the point is here, none of this is rocket science. A contingency factor of 10% in an incredibly uncertain situation, you don't need a PhD to say, ooh, not so good. So there's some cautions. But once a decision is made, and remember, you're planners. We hope someday that most of you, if not all of you, will be ministers. If you went to CEPT, the odds are you'll be ministers, you'll be commissioners, for sure. Directors, managing directors. But until you get to that point, you're serving decision-making. And once the decisions are made by our leaders, one of the things you can use your knowledge to do is help them make the case. Because the chief minister of state, or the secretary of transport, secretary of urban development for the state, will have to convince the chief minister of the state, or the chief minister of the state will have to convince the prime minister or the minister of urban development and housing. So there needs to be professional support, even if you haven't made the decision. Even if you don't agree with the decision, it's still up to you to help that decision come to pass. That's what our job is. What's the next step? We've made the decision. We now have a project. It's not just, this is a priority place where we want to do something with public transport. It's defined in terms of mode, alignment. We know if it's elevated or on the ground, plus or minus a few meters. We have a basic sense of the costs and benefits. Now we go into more detail. And hopefully at the end of that process, it will prove to be financially and operationally feasible, and we can actually go into implementing the project. Anyway, a lot of this, up to about August 17th, I think in India, this was a theoretical exercise being pushed by professors and people from outside. The new metro policy now is going to be mandating that for metro projects. And as I said, I believe that if the Ministry of Urban Development and Housing was smart, they would be mandating it for flyovers, elevated highways, BRTS, new bridges. The idea of thinking about what you do before you do it is not a uniquely rapid transit problem. Anyway, so it's become something different. What are the key messages? You got a lot of different factors that have to be considered. Tough to do it with a 40-year horizon for the city as a whole. Second message, there's no silver bullet here. Elevated highways are not always the answer to every question. They're one of many things you can do to improve the highway system. Detailed alternatives analysis focused on the sub-area corridor is an excellent idea. And the last, communications. And the reason I want to talk about that last is we're often asked, what makes this process relevant? What makes it relevant to do these kind of intricate studies? It may take a year in a complicated corridor or more. And the thing that makes it relevant is transparency, the light, the fact that everybody knows what you're doing. So it's very difficult for a clown like this guy pushing the monorail in Jakarta. Very difficult for someone like that to come to the chief minister, the prime minister, the mayor, and scratch their back or whatever and end up with a project. So transparency, planning an fishbowl, good communications, which I'm an engineer, we don't like to do that. We have trouble talking to audience. See, it's a good idea to have this communications process in place. Anyway, I apologize for speaking too long. And again, I really appreciate being able to be here. It's a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. And it's very interesting way to talk about alternatives, right? Yep. Now, we will have time for questions at the end. Yep. I invite Ajay Kumar to talk about urban transport institutions, okay, various functions and auditions.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ajay Kumar. I join my colleague Sam Zimmerman saying that it's always a pleasure to come to CEPT. We have now been coming here since 2012 and to interact with Professor Swami, his colleagues, his students. It's a great delight to us, and we in the process learn a lot. So thank you all very much for giving us this opportunity. On to institutions. All of you live in Ahmedabad, all of you come from different cities. I was to ask you, what is the one problem of urban transport that you face in your cities? What would your answer be? One problem of urban transport. Sorry? Last mile connectivity, yes. Quality. Congestion, I guess. I also was to ask you, what do you think should the solution be? And remember, urban transport is one area. Ask anyone on the street. Ask anyone, he will have an answer. Will know what the solution should be. Buy more buses, build more freeways, build the metro, build the underground train. Everybody will have some answer to it. Of course, somebody will say, who is not a planner? You do this, you study this area. And as Sam said, it's not rocket science. How difficult it is to solve the problem. My only response there would be, you go back 50 years, look at all the experiments of rocket science, see how many have failed and how many have succeeded. Then you go back to your urban transport business and see how many of the urban transport case studies have succeeded and how many have failed. See the ratio, which is likely to be more successful case. Rocket science experiments or urban transport experiments? Sorry? Rocket science. Rocket science experiment is more likely to succeed than urban transport experiment. And we still insist on saying, guys, it's not rocket science. How difficult it is. And why is that so? And why is it so? In rockets, you deal with numbers, you deal with science, you deal with analytics. In urban transport, you deal with people. You deal with emotions, you deal with perceptions. Which is what makes it very, very difficult. I mean, if you're only dealing with atoms and microns, you can probably find a solution. But there are as many solutions in this room or on the street as the number of people. And I'm not saying who is right and who is wrong. So, which is what makes urban transport very complex. And at the heart of urban transport really is, the problem is not whether you have a high floor bus or a low floor bus, you have freeway or you don't have a freeway, you have underground or overground. Problem often boils down to the fact, do you have the right institutions, right people, right resources to do what you are doing? When the World Bank did an urban transport policy about 2001, 2002, the basic conclusion they made was that lack of institutions is at the heart of the problem of urban transport that we have. Technical issues, one can find an answer to, that's not a big problem. Sam talked about alternative analysis. To do those kind of analysis, you need institutions, you need people. They are not done in isolation. Let's just go over the various issues here. And I welcome any questions here. I don't like to just hear myself. So welcome any questions that you may have, any different interpretation that you may have. Why is it important? When we say institution, what do we mean by it? What should it be doing? What are the different levels? What are the forms and what are the lessons? When we say institutions, we say Urban Mass Transport Authority. Back in 2006, the government of India made the urban transport policy. One of the requirements of the policy was that if you were to access the funding from the national government, the city must set up a AMTA. A lot of cities set up AMTA because it was a requirement from the national government. You needed an AMTA to access the money. Without really understanding why and how. And how. They only knew they need to create an AMTA. Jaipur was an example of that, Mumbai is an example of that, Bangalore is an example of that, Hyderabad is an example of that. I think before we actually get down cities level creating AMTA, it's important to understand why do we need AMTA and how should we create it and what does it need for this institution to succeed. Just creating it is not the solution. That's okay. So, basically, why it is important to create this institution is that that is what makes urban transport complex. If you have to build a road, you deal with one agency, which is Public Works Department. You want to build housing, you deal with one ministry, which is Ministry of Housing. You want to deal with water, you deal with one ministry, which is Ministry of Water. You want to deal with energy, you deal with one ministry. When you work with urban transport, you are dealing with different ministries and different layers of government: central, state, city. You're dealing with Ministry of Transport, you're dealing with Ministry of Environment, you're dealing with Ministry of Housing, you're dealing with Ministry of Finance, you're dealing with Ministry of with the Traffic Police. All of these have something to do about some role to play in urban transport. And unless all these are somehow coordinated at a strategic level, at the institutional level, you will not be able to find the right solution. Just building a road or a metro or a freeway or buying buses might solve your short-term problem, but will not solve your long-term problem of sustainability. So you need institutions because of the multiplicity of agencies responsible for urban transport in any city in the world. I mean, if the city is small, it's simpler. We are dealing with one city boundary like Ahmedabad. It's one municipality. The city is big like Mumbai or Delhi, we are dealing with multiple institutions, multiple sort of layers of government. But still, even in Ahmedabad, there are different departments, different agencies that we deal with. We can build a road, but if the electricity department comes and digs that road to lay the cable, there is no coordination, you lose the road. So, you need So you need institutions because there are multiplicity, and you need institutions because you need to have functional integration, you need to have spatial integration, you need to have modal integration, and hierarchical integration. What do all these words mean? When we say functional integration, what functions are you talking about? Let's talk about TOD. I'm sure as students of planning, you all know what does TOD stand for. Transit-oriented development. Now, just saying that we should have transit-oriented development. Every plan likes to talk about it. Every planning agency likes to talk about. World Bank likes to talk about it. But transit-oriented development is not just a simple word. I like to say very often, for transit-oriented development, you must have transit and you must have development to have a TOD. Without transit and without development, you don't have a TOD. And second, to have TOD, you must have got access. You need to improve access. And who is responsible for improving access? You have the transport department, you have the traffic police improving access, you have public works, and there are others. You need to improve the density. Who is responsible for density? You have the Ministry of Housing, Environment, Zoning, Public Works. You also need to have a mixed land use. And who is responsible for land use? You have the Ministry of Finance, Department of Finance, there is a private sector who actually is responsible for development, and you have the planning department. So actually, it's easy to talk about we should have TOD, but to actually have TOD in practice, you need a coordination across all these departments. So some form of coordination at the planning level. To talk about TOD in absence of this some form of coordination at the planning stage remains to talk. We read books 40 years back. Singapore is the best example of TOD. It still remains the best example. Really, there are not many other examples. In Europe, there are some cities, but there are really not many examples. So, we need institutional coordination to be able to make sure that we can achieve true TOD and not just talk about it. We need modal integration. I mean, in every city, you have many modes. You have rail, you have bus, you have non-motorized transport. Within road, you have formal transport, informal transport, PRT, regular services. In rail, you have MRT, you have LRT, you have suburban rail. In NMT, you have walking, you have bicycling, you have other forms of transport. Now, if you have a department or agency responsible for each of these separate modes, then you really have an institutional integration. You'll end up in the problem like in Delhi, where you have excellent rail, excellent metro. And you can get, it's very comfortable and convenient to go from station to station. But once you reach your destination, you get off the station, what do? First of all, there is nothing to connect you. Somebody said last mile connectivity. So there needs to be coordination of the agency providing the last mile connectivity with the agency providing the rail, without which you cannot have an institutional coordination. So this is something to think about, that we need to, just creating AMTA is not enough. What is important is to recognize why do we need it and what does it take to create it. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying it can be done in a day. But if we know where we need to get to and where we are, we can at least draw a roadmap. Spatial integration. Ahmedabad is an exception, it's one municipality, but very often you have metropolitan areas with multiple municipalities. And every municipality has its own departments, its own agencies. If all of them coordinate differently and plan differently, issue licenses, different level of fines, different bus services, and I as a resident of that metropolitan area has to go from one municipality to another municipality to get to work. If the two municipalities don't talk to each other, I don't really care what the administrative boundaries are. My commute is made very inconvenient. If my bus service stops at one boundary of one municipality and I have to transfer to another bus in the second municipality, how convenient would that be? So we need institutions across metropolitan areas so that any metropolitan area planning. Then we need hierarchy. We have institutional coordination at a vertical level, which is federal, state, city, municipality. And there are different functions at different levels. At the spatial level, we have different departments and agencies. We need coordination across them. So that's what you need to coordinate across if you really want to think through what does it take to make the right decision. I mean, this is broadly the functions at different levels of government, at the central level, state level, city level. I mean, you have some basic, what we call as the strategic functions, which are seen to be the functions to be performed at the national level. And typically, those are setting environmental standards, preparing strategic plans, deciding on financing, more of central level functions. Below that, you have technical level functions that can be sort of passed on to a lower order of government, which have to do with the regulation. I mean, bus regulation. The bus regulation. Every city has to decide for the how to regulate those buses. That's not a central function of central body. Similarly, planning, project planning, implementation, service planning. These are done at a state level or a municipal level. And then they are what we call as the common functions, which is within a city, if you have a bus depot, or a bus terminal, or a train terminal that can serve multiple services at the same time. Every bus operator does not need to have his own bus stop and his own bus depot. So you have common functions which can sort of be shared among different operators, and then you have specific bus services to be provided by each operator. So when you talk about institutions, and different functions will require different level of coordination and different functions. But it's important to think systematically about what is it you do, what is the planning exercise, who does what, at what level, where do you need the coordination. What are the different forms of institutions? If you're talking about a metropolitan area, you need to create an umbrella organization. Again, when we say what are the different forms, it is not important to talk about an urban metropolitan transport authority from day one. You can talk about an umbrella organization, you can talk about a department, you can talk about an agency. The important thing is you need to find some coordination basis at different levels of government to be able to coordinate. So, understanding the functions of AMTA is more important than actually just creating it. Then I think you can make compromises, you can do things which are more doable. Not just create something on paper, which never functions. Jaipur created an AMTA, which probably has not met in the last 5 years. Mumbai has sort of AMTA managed by MMRDA, but the municipal corporation of Mumbai is not within the control of that AMTA. And municipal corporation of Mumbai is a rich body, so they don't really care about what MMRDA or the national state level planning they do. I mean, you can't coordinate. That is what one needs to think about at the strategic level, maybe at the central secretary level. What does it take? How to coordinate? And some international examples. Here are some of the international examples. Paris, London, Singapore, Mumbai, Metro Manila. These are different examples, different contexts. Paris, I don't know if you are familiar with sort of urban planning in France. Paris has TIF, which was created sometime in 2000. Created sometime in late 90s or early 2000. This is responsible for regulation only of public transport, not roads, not taxis. Then on the other hand, you have Singapore Land Transport Authority, which is responsible for managing both public and private and road infrastructure. Then you have London, Transport for London, which was created back in late 90s, which comes within the mayor of Greater London Council, which is responsible for public transport and urban planning to some extent. Mumbai is one extreme example. Of course, Metro Manila has another metro development authority. We talk about what is common, what is similar across these, and what are differences across these. I think the point that you need to remember is that all these bodies, excepting from Mumbai perhaps, all these took decades and decades to take the shape that they are today. They were not created overnight. All these existed in some form or the other since 1960s and 70s. And they are still evolving. So it's a dynamic process. It's not a static process. It's not something, the law says create an AMTA, and tomorrow you go and secretary signs a piece of paper and says we have created an AMTA. That's not how it works. What are the similarities across these? All these except Mumbai were established under dedicated legislation. I'm not saying that is a requirement, that's how it is. They're all created under dedicated legislation. They all plan across multiple LGUs, except for Singapore, of course, which is a country by itself. And all these, what we call AMTAs, were not really new bodies created on top of everything else. There already were different departments which were either merged or redesignated to give those functions. And I make that point because in India, when you talk about AMTA, you actually are talking about creating new bodies on top of everything else. The challenge that is, and then there's a conflict between the current functions performed by the existing bodies and the new functions assigned to the new bodies, and there's an overlap, there's a conflict, and nothing works. When in Singapore, there are four departments. Actually, all the four were merged back in 96, 97 to call it Land Transport Authority. All the people working in those four departments were put together under one single department. All the civil service rules were reorganized to make common civil service functions for all these four departments to come under one unit. The basic motivation in Singapore and Paris and London, basic motivation was that, I think that's something for India to think about. All these cities grew tremendously over 80s and 90s. They grew in size and they grew in income. They became richer. So people started expecting and demanding better quality of service. When people started demanding better quality of service, if you have bifurcated transport, urban, land use bifurcated, surely those services could not be provided in an efficient way to the consumer. It was, and same applies to London. Urban development, transport were different functions. But it was in response to creating a comprehensive planning and provide better services to people that these authorities were doing. Now, India, that lesson is very important because those cities are saturated. I'm not sure how much will they grow any further. India cities will double in size in the next 15 years. All statistics, all the UN statistics, all Indian statistics will just that they will double in size. Now, today, if you say you have congestion, think about what would cities look like 15 years from today. When you get double the people living in the same city, in the same area. Something has to change, something has to do. You have to do things, you have to plan differently, you have to finance differently, you have to think differently. It cannot be business as usual. Creating the right institutions, thinking through the right institutions rather than just creating something on paper. A coordination body which meets once in a year, will not really solve the problem. If cities are doubling in size in India in the next 15 years, you have to think through what did other cities do, what do you need to do, what are your specific circumstances, what do you need to do differently to actually be able to succeed. What are the differences? I mean, different cities are different. How are public transport services provided? In Paris, at least as of now, they are all provided by state transport. In London, they are all contracted out. In Singapore, they are all contracted out. So, it is not as if there is one model used in all the cities. There are different models used. Some are responsible only for public transport. Some are responsible for public transport and taxis and roads. But there's one thing common which I think I have not mentioned. One thing is common across all the successful institutions. they have a dedicated source of funding. Now, whether the source of funding comes from the user fees or as subventions from the government, it is committed, it is fixed, it is dedicated every year. It is not based on how well the economy is doing, what are the other competing demands, because for these institutions to succeed, you must have a dedicated source of funding. And why do you need funding? You need funding because you need to employ people. And you need funding as the AMTA because, as I like to say, who cares really about planning? I'm the Ministry of Works, I build roads. I'll continue building roads. You tell me this is not a good road or a bad road, how do I care? I know how to build roads and I get my financing directly from the central government, and I'll continue building roads. Now for me to follow a strategic plan laid out by a coordinating body, that coordinating body must have some control over the Ministry of Works. Some kind of control, some requirement, legislative requirement that they must follow. For the Ministry of Housing and Ministry of Works to actually follow a comprehensive plan. And to do that, this body must have some financing instruments. And there are various examples, various ways of doing it. Again, there's no one simple answer. What is the necessary condition for setting up these AMTAs? They say, you need human capacity, you need technical people. Just by reallocating your civil servants, which is very often done in India, which may be good, may not be so good, who change their position every 3 years, surely will not create sustainable institutions. And urban transport is a technical field. And we need technical people to solve the problem. And to get those technical people, you need to pay the money. So you need to have money, you need to have technical people, and you need to have financial resources. And then you need to have political support. To get the financial resources, you need political support. But without these three elements, you can't really have a sustainable. Once you have created this body, what do you need to sustain it? You need this body cannot become any other agency or department. It must continue to do things which people see as something of public good. When you have Janmark here in Ahmedabad, people see the BRT and they associate the success of BRT with Janmark. And Janmark gets a lot of public support. Tomorrow the BRT stops functioning very well. It will be very difficult for Janmark to continue to getting the resources that it gets otherwise. So there must be something good that you do as an institution to get political support and get the financial necessary to keep you going. Communication, public opinion. That is the part of public good. You do public good, communicate with the people. And that is one way that you can actually make your agency, your institution, demand some political respect. I mean, Transport for London introduced this access charges, which are seen as a great success. Singapore is seen as one of the best examples of modern, comprehensive, integrated transport. When you, as a government, want to create these institutions, you have to ask yourself certain questions. What functions do you want this institution to perform? Is it only public transport or all forms of transport? Should it be for one city or the entire region? And I'm raising these questions because there is no one recipe for all contexts. What form of AMTA you create will be based on what exactly your city wants, what is your capacity, what are your resources, what is your mandate. But what you have to keep in mind is what is it that you should be asking, what are the questions you should be asking yourself. And these are the questions you should be asking. How should you get legal authority? Should it be by legislation, executive order? What powers to be given? Or do you want that institution to be connected with investment financing? Janmark has been created under a Companies Act, not under legislation. So there are different examples. It's all a question of you need to decide what are the questions you are asking, where you are, where you want to go, what you need to know, and then the path will follow. How should they be financed? Should they be financed by the grants, by internally generated resources, dedicated access, or a combination? And there are examples of all of these from different country contexts. Where should the resources come from? From where should the people come from? From existing agencies, new recruitment, international consultants, or some combination? What should the function style be? Should be very lean and thin organization, which is contracting out all the major functions, or should be big organization doing everything in-house? And should you have a AMTA? I mean, another question. Should you have a AMTA for every small city, or maybe you can have a AMTA at a state level, which can be used to advise every small city in that state? I don't know, but based on what is the starting point is, you need to decide that. AMTA needs resources, AMTA needs people. And the people is the most scarce than the resources. So if you don't have the technical capacity as much, maybe you can think in a small way, think about creating at a state level and have them support all the smaller cities within that state. Key messages. There's no golden rule here. You have to decide what you want. The good thing is that there are a lot of messages, a lot of examples from international context, and you can learn a lot from that. But how you adapt it will be based on what is it that you want. So, as I always like to say, look for the best fit, not the best practice. We always get caught in the best practice. We don't end up with anything. I mean, I'm sure you have heard the expression that excellence is the enemy of good. You aim for excellence and you don't even attain the basic good when it comes to public planning. Existing new authorities takes a very long time. It's not something which can just be done on a piece of paper by an executive order. You can do that. Cities in India have tried to do that. That has not really worked. People meet once every month or once every year and call that a number. Not making any decisions. With no resources, no permanent technical people. And if you are creating an AMTA by taking away functions of existing bodies, be careful what you are asking for. That's not going to be easy. There's going to be conflict. No agency would willingly give up its functions to a new organization. And in a bureaucratic setup, that would just lead to challenges in your functioning. So the whole message here is that for solving urban transport, you don't need a metro, you don't need a BRT, as a starting point. You don't need underground, you don't need overground, you don't need more buses. You need to first create the planning capacity. I think links up with what Mr. Zimmerman was saying. Planning capacity to do a good analysis of what is it that we want. All these things, BRT, MRT, overground, underground, flyover, these are all solutions. These are all solutions, as we say. These are all solutions looking for a problem. Understand your problem first. And to understand the problem, you need people, you need institutions, you need capacity. We somehow come from engineering institutions, most of us, and we get taught in the engineering solutions. Low floor bus, high floor bus, CNG bus, double floor bus, second layer freeway, third layer freeway. We get taught in all these technical problems, but I think Mr. Zimmerman mentioned that. If we don't do well in urban transport, it is not for lack of technical solution, it is for lack of non-technical solutions. We need to understand that. I think once we sort of understand that and connect with that, all our technical knowledge can come to a great use, but not in essence of it. So thank you very much. The first thing that you need to do is to identify who the stakeholders are. Who gains and who loses from this decision. Those are your stakeholders. Who loses and who gains, that can be a range. Could be government departments, could be private sector, could be NGOs, could be disabled people, could be women, could be shopkeeper, could be driver. At any level, who are directly impacted by your decision. Those are the people you need to communicate with. All throughout the process. Planning, design, whichever level they belong to. The central government surely is a stakeholder, so you need to communicate with them. State government is a stakeholder, you need to communicate with them. But people, affected people are your stakeholders, you need to communicate with them. So look, you have to define who is impacted on the positive side or the negative side. And they're both important. My colleague, Mr. Zimmerman, drew that planning process, which started with the strategic vision. Now, strategic vision, what do you want your city to look like years from today? Do you want it a people-friendly city? Do you want a high-density city? Do you want a low-density city? Do you want a car-dominated city? Do you want a green city? Do you want a white city? How do you make that decision? That decision is not made sitting in the four walls of the ministry. That decision should be made by consulting with the people who are affected by it. So start from the vision, create your vision in consultation with people. Then you define strategies. What are the strategies you need to attain that vision? Then what are the plans to attain that strategy? So you need to go in a sequential process. At every stage, you need to do a very thorough consultation if you want your plans to succeed. Because consultation also, besides consultation and improving your design, also increases your accountability. And I'll give you an example of that. You are building the metro here. You have a deadline by so-and-so date, the metro should be finished. If this was any American city or a European city, the big boards along the mass transit line, excuse the inconvenience, you'll have the metro by so-and-so date. People know that by this date you'll have the metro. And the metro is not done by that date, those doing the metro are held accountable. Not done here, and I know they will not do in time. We already know that, talking to the metro people. So look, this is done at every stage, in every stage of the planning process. Right.
One quick thing. Remember, there's no one mechanism to do it. Right? For example, Ajay just mentioned a billboard. I think you've got to be careful that when you talk to different stakeholders, you need to use different methodologies for the talking. We were involved in the Philippines in a project where the planners spent a lot of time in bars, in taverns, Why? Because one of the most important stakeholder groups were people who currently drove minibuses. In Cebu, in the Philippines, there are 8,000 minibuses, 2 shifts, 16,000 drivers, maybe another 5,000 mechanics. That's 21,000. Add the families and everybody else. There were 100,000 stakeholders in what happened to their system. If we only talked to them after we had decided what to do, not we, but local officials, there would have been a very difficult situation. And because they're working, you couldn't depend on them coming to formal meetings during the day. Half of them you couldn't depend on at night. So I think nobody ever suffered from having too transparent a process. You often hear that, but I personally have never witnessed a situation where transparency hurt.
Expectation management is the key. If you create over expectation, okay, when you communicate, then you will have a management.
So my question is on yeah. My question is on implementation. And as you said, you should look for the best fit and not for the best practice. But what is there are certain conditions that best fit is somehow unviable. For example, in Kenya, last time we had lectures, so said that there was a demand for public transport, but then the IPD system was so affordable for the people that they didn't favor for the people. Didn't favor what? PT, public transport.
There are multiple, yeah, there are multiple answers to your question. I mean, affordability is one of them, and what is suitability is another, appropriateness is another. I mean, your first presumption, or anybody's first presumption that a public transport will be more expensive than an informal transport is not a correct presumption, and we can give you examples of that. Well, and efficiently provided public transport can be provided at lower cost than the informal transport. And this is, I'm talking about Nairobi. I'm quite familiar with Nairobi, been there quite a few times. So, when I say it should be a best fit, not a best practice, we want to create an UNTA. We want to improve our public transport. We want to do a BRT. We look at Bogota. They've got a BRT. Now, if we start thinking in our city, whatever the city in India is, wants to do BRT, and we get experts from Colombia, and say, guys, create the BRT like you have done in your city, in our city. Is that possible? Is that desirable? Do you have the money for it? Do you have the land capacity for it? Roads capacity for it? No. And the BRT that works very well in Bogota may not work here at all because our expectations are different. People are different, culture is different, resources are different, land is different. So we have to create a BRT design. Ultimately, what is a good BRT? What is a good BRT system? A good BRT system is the one which serves the consumer needs the best. We are not here comparing it to some standard in city A, B, or C that is the BRT. No, we are looking for the BRT which is serving the needs the best, and people are most happy with it. That's the good BRT for you. That is what I mean by the best fit. Creating UMTAs. When you create a mass transport, you can go to Paris, you can go to London, you can go to Singapore, you can go to Vancouver. All these contexts are different. You need to first define what is the problem in your city. Problem in a diverse institutions, people, resources. And then think about how, once there is a problem, learning from all these cities, what is it that you can borrow from them to adapt to it to solve your problem. You can take elements of best practice, but not necessarily all of them. Good, best solution with tailored solutions. Absolutely correct. And applies to everything. Yes.
You know, the irony of mentioning Nairobi, one of the things we're finding in, quote, high-tech places, frankly, like places in India, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, is that technology is being used to convert informal services to address the issues such as overcharging, stealing by conductors, lack of schedules, lack of quality. Technology can be used to make informal services that provide point-to-point transport phenomenally cost-effective. Lower the cost, provide better customer service. But there are a lot of people from international organizations that are going around the world telling people informal services are terrible. You have to come up with a public transport system that looks like Hamburg. Put all those minibuses in Jakarta or in Manila or in Nairobi out of business and replace that with a state-owned bus company. We call that the Hamburg model. First came out in the mid-'70s. One institution was in charge of all transport. It was a state-owned bus company, no competition. Anyway, to make a long story short, the world of Europe, the world of the States, and to a certain degree places in India now are moving to using technology to make informal sector services not only equal to but better for the customer and cost effective for the company. And yet, some people think that there is a gold standard for public transport. Everything needs to look like, pardon? Yeah, platinum standard. Everything needs to look like Paris or Curitiba. We have our vision that we're Paris. Well, maybe Nairobi's not Paris. Maybe there's something about Nairobi that's unique, or something about Kohiko that's unique to that place. We're finding in South Africa, for an example, under apartheid, the only opportunities for black people to be entrepreneurs was in informal public transport. It's a cultural issue, a source of pride, a source of business, a source of employment. And somebody's going to come along and tell them that, no, you need to be like Bogota. Fancy BRT system, get rid of the minibuses, pay them off, let them go, who knows what. And there was incredible pushback. So the best thing for Nairobi, the gold standard for Corridor X in Nairobi, the alternatives analysis business, is different than perhaps even another corridor in Nairobi, and sure as heck is different than one in Joburg or Cape Town, and sure as heck is different than one in Washington. And that kind of, if you didn't have any public involvement, if you parachuted into Johannesburg or Nairobi, with your preconceived notions, never talked to him, never communicated, never shared ideas, you'd be pushing something that's wholly inappropriate.
What fits best for you is the best practice, right? But that doesn't mean you carry 10 people in a rickshaw and that you would promote. Yeah? Remember that part. I think that's what was bugging you. But that cannot be something which you can.
When you say best way, you have to keep in mind not just private cost, but social cost, externality, environment, safety. Those are very important issues. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're right. That carrying 6 people on a two-wheeler is the best practice for me. That is an unfair practice. That's a very unsafe, a very undesirable. So I think we need to understand this. We need to see this in a broader context. Any other topic that you have in mind, not necessarily related to people presentation, we have to give a brief on that. Anything that you may be working on, any project or anything else?
Yes, Ajay and Sam are there. It's about afternoon. Yeah? We are all there. Is there anything related to the thesis? Anyway, any of those kinds, most welcome. And Yes, there will be sometime in the morning. I'm sure you have had a long day. Like to thank both.